Tonight's program is presented in collaboration with the Chef in Residence program at the Museum of the African Diaspora and the Afro-Asian group. I want to have deep special thanks to MOAD staff members Elizabeth Jessel, who's the Director of Public Programs, and Nia McAllister, the Public Programs Manager, for their collaboration. And we hope collaboration into the future, and you will meet them in just a moment. And tonight, the program that we have is delving into the bittersweet history of sugar to unearth stories of Afro-Asian cultural exchange in the Caribbean. Through conversation and cooking, artist Andrea Chung and scholar Dr. Tao Leigh Goffe explore the crossroads of Black and Asian diaspora arts and cuisines, focusing on foodways that evolved out of colonial plantations, from Cuba to Louisiana, Jamaica to Mauritius, and including my father's homeland of Trinidad. Our guests will demonstrate sugar art techniques and recipes for sweet plantains and a special sugar surprise while celebrating ingenuity and Afro-Asian solidarity. So I'm going to turn it over to Nia to introduce you to tonight's presenters. Nia.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at MOAD. And we're honored today to have both Bryant Terry and our Chef in Residence program co-presenting today's event. Unfortunately, Bryant is unable to join us tonight, but we are very grateful for his collaboration and his support in bringing together the wonderful speakers for today's event. As the inaugural Chef in Residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora, Bryant Terry creates programming that celebrates the intersection of food, farming, health, activism, art, culture, and the African diaspora. We would also like to thank Kaiser Permanente for their generous support for the Chef in Residence program. It's now my honor to introduce artist Andrea Chung and scholar Tao Leigh Goffe. Andrea Chung is an artist based in San Diego, California. Her work focuses primarily on island nations in the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean Sea within the context of colonial and post-colonial regimes. Tao Leigh Goffe is Assistant Professor of Literary Theory and Cultural History at Cornell University. She is also a writer and DJ specializing in the narratives that emerge from histories of imperialism, migration, and globalization. Tao will also be in conversation with Bryant Terry next Friday, May 28th, for his bi-monthly Instagram live series, Chopping It Up. And with that, welcome both.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm really excited that I'm here today with all of these wonderful folks in California. I'm located in New York City. I'm Tao Leigh Goffe, as Nia just said. And yeah, I just wanted to welcome Andrea Chung and to say that it's an honor to be here with you this evening.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you too. It's just different because like we already know each other. So I think we have a rapport with one another.
Exactly. Even though we have never met in person, I feel like we've just missed each other around the globe.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Sorry, my vet calling me.
During, this pandemic period, I feel like we've grown even closer because we know once we're in person and can collaborate, it's going to be incredible to celebrate African and Asian culture, food, especially, and art. So I'm looking forward to when that day can happen.
Definitely. I think we have lots more projects to work on together after this.
Yeah, and so my work really is around this question of Afro-Asia and Afro-Asian as a term and how the two are different. So I've been thinking about it a lot, especially because it's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And I feel like this year feels different, right? In terms of questions of anti-Asian hate, histories that we have long known about, but a new attention, is here this year, especially because of the movement for Black Lives. So yeah, I wonder what your thoughts are on APA Heritage Month this year.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I don't think until fairly recently that I've been sort of a part of the culture now. Like it's always been this anomaly, just primarily because like living in American culture where it's unusual for there to be Afro-Asian people. I think people didn't know what to do with me. Even though it's for the rest of us, this is like a no-brainer. It's pretty common. It's unfortunate everything that's happening right now. Because I'm more Black presenting than my family members. My family members look more Chinese than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So, every time I see this happening, I'm just like, I wish you would roll up on my grandfather and like push him in the street. Like I would straight up punch him in the face. Like you cannot do that to people. Like I feel like the pandemic has made people lose their humanity in a lot of ways. And it's unfortunate that this is happening. There's been a lot of attacks here in San Diego as well. There's a huge Filipino population here. So it's been really disheartening to see that. And I feel like the best that I can do is show solidarity. I've had friends show solidarity to me with Black Lives Matter. So I feel like it's only right to reciprocate. So it's been kind of surreal to see all of this happen. I did not expect this to happen, especially like to blame others for the pandemic when you don't want to wear a mask. So it's like the two don't really make sense together. So all I can do is support.
Yeah, and I feel like solidarity is a key word for us to discuss tonight. For me as a historian, I hear what's going on in terms of anti-Asian violence and also in terms of pandemics, epidemics, and I think about San Francisco and the kind of anti-Asian violence that was taking place there around the turn of the century. So
yeah, definitely.
New, right? And
yeah,
especially to so-called bachelors.
I think people have a short memory when it comes to things that have been done to Asian people in this country, from San Francisco on to, Japanese internment camps. So I think that I'm hoping that people will actually pay attention historically to what has happened in this country to Asian folks, just to, this is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. And I'm actually hoping that this brings all the POCs together so that we understand that our greatest enemy is white supremacy. And I hope that's something that we can learn from this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that is really the key to understanding this kind of triangulation of race and what white supremacy does. But that it's really critical for us to also say that Afro-Asian people like me and you are also not new, and that places like Trinidad, Jamaica, across the world for centuries, there have been communities of African and Asian heritage. So for me, it's like an interesting moment where people are talking about Black and Asian solidarity, but they don't think to ask people like us who actually negotiate, Black identity, Asian diasporic identity within our family tree and at home. So
and also the complication of being immigrants and how that dynamic of immigrants coming into certain places that, I think about LA and, the relationship between Koreans and Black Americans that live in those areas, and how they all have to sort of negotiate that, and thinking about how taking on the immigrant experience alongside taking into consideration the Black experience. And I'm hoping that this moment can be a bonding experience.
Yeah, so that we don't repeat these kinds of injuries of the past, right? Because anti-Black racism exists within Asian communities, right? And we have to be able to discuss what that means. And I feel, optimistically, food that we're here to talk about tonight can be a really bittersweet way to really reckon with the deep history of racial slavery, but also of racial indentureship. So that's what I love about your work as a visual mixed media artist, is that you're looking at the history of both And many people have never heard of this institution, indentureship, or racial indenture, as I call it. So yeah, I just feel really honored to be able to be here with you, somebody who understands this history that Asian people and Black people, Afro-Asian people, were on plantations together,
Yeah.
right? Your parents are from the Caribbean. Yeah.
I think people forget also like instances of like places like Hawaii, where, you know, you have indentureship there. And also, like, I think that there's some really great people that are trying to make that bond, like Roy Choi in LA has been doing a lot of sort of trying to bring the two cultures together. And, you know, we need more of that. You know, we definitely need more of that.
Exactly. And I think it's this question of the plantation and plantation foodways that I feel in your work, but also in the fact that I've seen your cooking during this pandemic period. And I just started cooking a year ago because I've been able to, because I've been at home.
Okay, you do not look like you have just been cooking for this year, because you are cooking some stuff that I'm like, where is she getting these ingredients from? And they're super fancy, like they could be in a like 5-star Michelin restaurant. So it's I'm just like scrapping some stuff together to feed the people in my house. But you're cooking some like really amazing things, and I'm just like, crabs, sea urchin, like no.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. And really,
I did not.
I feel, I was telling Bryant Terry this, and I'm so honored that, you know, he made tonight happen, that I feel possessed in the kitchen. Maybe my grandmothers who are from Jamaica are like with me here because, you know, we're going to be cooking plantains tonight. And that is something that I remember that one of my grandmothers used to cook, but she never taught me how to do it. So I've just been really missing the Caribbean, being able to travel, Trinidad in particular, Tobago. That's why I was cooking that curry crab dish, because
I made the same dish too. Yeah, you know, like San Diego has like 0 Caribbean people. There's like a few spots, but the food's really not. It's really catered to like American tastes. So for me, the best way to feel at home has been to learn to cook the dishes that I want. So like making beef patties and doubles and things like that, that I can't, you know, like if I wish I was in New York to go to A&A's, but you know, I can't. So let me try to do the best that I can with what I have here. There was an artist actually who sent me some Scotch bonnet peppers, Anthony Paul Smith, and I was like, thank you. And we harvested those seeds and we grew Scotch bonnets out here and made pepper sauce. And like, that really got us through like a year of the pandemic of like making really good, what felt like authentic Caribbean food. Like the taste is just very specific. Like people try to substitute with habaneros, but it's not the same. There's like a sweetness that comes to the Scotch bonnet that you can't really recreate with anything else. So exactly. I said, get your doubles in Oakland. I'm gonna make doubles. A&A's has shrimp doubles, which I had never seen before, which was completely mind blowing. I was like, 2 things that I love all smashed together. So
yeah, I'm just cooking all of my cravings, but also realizing that so much labor goes into this cooking, and also that this cultivation, you know, you're talking about gardening, that this is what our ancestors who were enslaved or might have been indentured, this is what they were doing. They were cultivating on the plantation. Apart from having to harvest sugarcane, bananas, and other products, they also had their own gardens, which gives me such joy to think about what they were free to cook on their own. So,
and for me, it's also the way for me to pass down culture to my child, because he's not, you know, it's not easy to go to the Caribbean from here. It's really expensive. So I feel like if there's anything that I can do, I can pass down the food. And foodways have always been fascinating to me. And I want him to understand how people moved from one place to another, but still carried those traditions, and how, you know, they show themselves in different ways.
I think it's so critical because we don't find our histories in textbooks, right? we're
Wow.
starting to see our histories in museums like the Museum of African Diaspora and the Asian Art Museum, who are bringing together these conversations. But largely, I think the Asian experience of the Caribbean gets left out.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Yeah, so it's really exciting that in your work, you make people reckon with that, with the plantation, and in connection to the Indian Ocean, right? There's so much there and ways in which like the sea becomes an archive,
Yeah.
right? For this history that is painful, but there's a lot of power there too.
It was also a very interesting experience to me because, you know, when I got the Fulbright and I went to Mauritius, I was going there to look at the food, to talk about migration patterns. And we just happened to stay with a Fulbrighter who had married a Mauritian, and he was Chinese Mauritian, and he was Hakka. And that was like particularly great to me because I was just like, damn, I can like learn all of this stuff about like Hakka people that like I just didn't have access to because my grandfather, you know, he was in Jamaica and I didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time with him. So it was really dope getting to spend so much time around that Hakka community. And I'm still actually really, we're still in touch with our, you know, Mauritian friend, and he is an amazing cook. So we trade recipes back and forth, but to have him there and to like be able to like learn more about my grandfather through him was really an amazing experience. And that's definitely something that always stays with me, was that I was able to meet other people that had like a similar history in some place that was completely far away from the Caribbean. So that was very meaningful for me.
Yeah, like halfway across the world. And
yeah.
Local story. So I actually have on hand my Hakka cookbook. I don't know if you have a copy of this.
No, but I will have to get one from you.
I'll send you one. So for those who don't know, Hakka is the name that describes the ethnic group that Andrea and I are part of within Chinese culture. You can Google to learn more about it, but they are a minority within China. Whereas in Jamaica, of the Chinese who are there, the majority are Hakka. So we have our own dialect, so language, own cuisine, and all of these practices that I'm actually writing about. So in my day job as a professor, I'm writing a book called Black Capital, Chinese Debt that looks a lot at Hakka history. So I guess I can actually transition now into professor mode to give a little mini lecture, because people are probably wondering, wait, so Chinese people in the Caribbean, plantations, what are they talking about? So I'm gonna go through a little slideshow to kind of give you a sense of the history and what is at stake here in terms of the 1800s, 1900s, and how long it is that there has been an Asian presence in the Caribbean. So both South Asian, Indian, and East Asian Chinese. Okay, so after the mini lecture, I will be joining Andrea again. And for the rest of the evening, we're gonna be cooking plantains. So we have my recipe, plantains prop gop, which is what I've called it. So been on bananas Foster. Caution for those of you, you know, cooking over an open flame with alcohol is very dangerous. If you've never done it before, don't let today be the first day to burn down your kitchen. But yeah, we're gonna have fun with that. And then Andrea is going to be showing us how important sugar is to her art practice. So yeah, I hope you all are comfortable and ready to cook with us or to watch. So you'll be able to play back the tape later if you want to cook this recipe. But yeah, I'm really excited for tonight. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Just 1 second. Okay. So wait, let me just make sure that the sound is on. I definitely, as a professor, so I teach at Cornell University, spend the majority of my life on Zoom, but never cooking in this way, so it's going to be really fun. All right, so Sugarwork is the title of tonight's program, and it's also the title of an article of mine that really was centering the artwork of Andrea and of another artist, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. So in this article that actually won the OSWAD, so Association of African Diaspora, Outstanding Article Prize this year, I coined this term gastropoetics as a way to think about what is created in the stomach and the poetry of food. So this evening, we are celebrating Afro-Asian foodways. And I also just want to highlight again that Bryant Terry is the reason that we're all here tonight. And it was an honor that he asked me to contribute to his forthcoming volume, Black Food, which is coming out October 19th. So I was able to contribute an essay. So it's called The Poetics of Afro-Asian Cuisine, and also a recipe. So you all should stay tuned for that. It's Jamaican style ackee and callaloo patties. So in that essay, I was able to think about what food has meant to me, especially during this pandemic period. As I said, before the pandemic, I really didn't cook at all. I had no time. My commute is 5 hours from New York City to Ithaca, always on the go, was always flying from here to there. But you know, the tragedy that has been the coronavirus pandemic, which is ongoing and being felt in different ways across the globe, made me have to be still for a moment and to think critically about the work that I was doing and the fact that I'm writing about food, but I had never tried to make doubles, right? I'd never tried to make a Jamaican beef patty. So it was really meaningful to be able to think about that and to actually engage in the labor of the kitchen. So this slide, Coolitude, highlights a point of connection between what Andrea was just talking about to do with Mauritius, so an island in Africa, and the ways in which there are connections to Trinidad. And the connections are through this history of indentureship. So when racial slavery was abolished, when emancipation took place in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world, different European powers, so the Spanish, the French, the British, the Danish, the Dutch, decided, okay, so now we're losing our labor force of enslaved Africans, let's replace them with Asians. And you can imagine the violent structures that went into place where there was actually a contract labor system, but people were continuing to be exploited, though they were technically signing contracts to labor on these plantations. Oftentimes sugar was being cultivated. So side by side, you would have newly emancipated Africans in places like Trinidad, working alongside people from South Asia, from India, and also people from China. So it is in this kind of intimacy in the 1900s, so post-emancipation, that I am interested in this question, right, of the keyword of solidarity. So in the article, I sit with different thinkers. You know, we started with a little bit of music for those of you who joined us early. I should also note that I'm a PhDJ. That is, you know, a professor and a DJ, and music is really important to my practice. So the whole sensorium is a part of how I do research. So Nina Simone's song For Women is really powerful to me because it's about inheritance. It's about women. It's about the plantation. It's about female genealogies, and the resonance of My Name is Sweet Thing from her song is something that sits with me. Stuart Hall is another important thinker to my work, the British intellectual from Jamaica, and the ways in which he talks about sugar are also really poignant in terms of thinking about being the sugar at the bottom of the English teacup and rotting generations of English children's teeth. So there's a bittersweet resonance in what sugar can do, what it means to have a sweet tooth, and also to think about the fact that we have sugar work, which is another word for Victorian practices of making desserts because of the transatlantic slave trade, because of the sugar that was able to be brought to Europe so that people could drink tea, right, for tea time in the UK. So for me, this question of Afro-Asia is really critical because it's a question of solidarity. It's a question of decentering Europe and thinking about what it means that these people, both Black and Asian, were brought together through colonialism in these different spaces. So the politics of this moment is important, and thinkers like W.B. Du Bois, who's pictured on the screen here, were talking about this. You know, in 1901, he talked about the darker races and how we all needed to come together to really decenter Europe. So that takes me to Andrea Chung and her work, Batu Disik, and the ways in which she has been, you know, molding sugar for quite some time, as I understand it. And I learned about her work through another Afro-Asian artist, Jody Lin Ki Chow, when I was in Chinatown at a Hakka conference, in fact, and I was presenting on artwork, and this other artist said, "Have you heard of Andrea Chung?" So I was like, oh, wow, this sounds perfect for what I'm thinking about to do with sugar, food. And here's a quote that you can read by Andrea, but we can also just listen to her later on. But I was just really struck by how ephemeral the artwork is, how it changes, how, you know, there must be a smell to it, how these boats disappear in water, and that she's sculpting, you know, and that it's a labor-intensive process. So I'm really concerned with the question of what it means to be descended from this history of violence, but also to build, to write history, to critique the violence of the plantation, to create something new and powerful. So here are some images of plantation life in Guyana in the 19th century, just to give you a sense of the variegated nature of where I draw answers to this question of the plantation. So Maria Magdalena Campos Pons also works with sugar and you know, thinks about the different types of sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, molasses, and how those can speak to a kind of hippantocracy in the Caribbean, and the ways in which sugar hurts. So that takes me to you know, the 19th century record of what it was that these people were eating on plantations. I was very curious to think about them harvesting sugar, but also to think about what they were eating. Did they have any choice? And here we can see from 1872 in Cuba that the diet is varied at other meals with plantain and rice. So that takes us to today. And the reason that I'm bringing together sugar and plantains so that we can think about what it means to put the two on the plate, to have like the natural sugars, the fruit sugars of the plantain, caramelizing in this process with the sugars of actual Demerara brown sugar. So to just conclude, you know, what do they call me? My name is Sweet Thing. I think that there is a lineage, a power in Black feminism, Black women to be able to create art, to create something beautiful that critiques the violence of this history and to imagine new futures. So before we just get into the actual cooking, I just wanted to play for you a tiny section of this commercial from 1947 that actually shows the ways in which the United Fruit Company, Chiquita, had to introduce an American market to bananas. And we can also talk about Banana Republics and the whole industry later on.
You're most digestible, my friend, delicious too from end to end. You can put them in a pie, any way you want to eat them. It's impossible to beat them, but bananas like the climate of the very, very tropical equator. So you should never put bananas in the refrigerator.
Okay, so I'm gonna end it there, but there are much worse. There are much worse Chiquita commercials from the 1940s that you should all look at. They're entirely problematic, but don't put bananas in the refrigerator. That's true. And yeah, I'm really excited to get cooking and to really think about what sugar means to Andrea. So I'm going to pass it over to her to say a bit about her artwork, because as a scholar, you know, this is what I'm thinking about, what I'm seeing, but obviously the artist will tell you what they were actually doing.
Oh my God, that commercial is horrendous. Needing instructions on how to eat a banana. So I know that there's some images, some slides of work that I've done with sugar, so we can go to that. So I will say that I've been working with sugar since 2007. And the reason why that I started working with it was when I was in grad school. I started off thinking that I was a painter, and then realized that I am not a painter. I don't care about the history of painting because it focuses primarily on the West. So I was trying to find a material or a medium that really spoke to the narrative of my family. I was also really broke when I started grad school. I literally had a butcher paper and 2 colors of paint, black and white. So I had been doing a lot of portraits of my family and of my grandmother, and sort of kind of trying to understand how my grandparents found their way into the Caribbean. And a lot of it revolved around sugar. This is a piece that I did at MOAD. It's probably my favorite installation that I've ever done because it was site specific and I only had a few days to install. So it was very spur of the moment, sort of playing around with, you know, the materials that I had and like working in the environment of San Francisco. So when I was initially approached to do this piece, it was part of a show called Rum, Coffee, Gold, Sugar, like focusing on the objects of colonialism. And I had been thinking a lot about this phrase, "I swear on a stack of Bibles." And when I got to San Francisco, I had just come from New York as well. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to cast the sugar, but I had all my molds with me. And the first place I stayed in had no kitchen. So I was in the curator's apartment cooking and burning sugar. My thermometer stopped working. It was just like a huge hot mess. But I think in the end, it really worked out for me that I had the time to play with burnt sugar versus undercooked sugar versus sugar that you're supposed to cook at a very specific temperature. So I was really thinking a lot about the way that religion has impacted the diaspora, both in negative and positive ways. So for this in particular, I was thinking about you know, like how religion has been used to justify slavery. So you know, Christians felt that they needed to civilize the savage, and they used the Bible as their reasoning to support that. But there was also something called the slave Bible, which had redacted parts of the Bible that that basically said why slavery was wrong. And slave masters would redact those things and then give the Bible to their slaves. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of effort. I'm fascinated in effort that people have put into oppressing other people. But also without, you know, without religion, I don't know if the civil rights movement would have happened. MLK was really great at galvanizing and really using the church as a way to support their movement and really get things happening. And also thinking about how religion was disguised. If you look at Haiti and think about voodoo and how it was hidden with Catholic saints. So a lot of the beads in the sculptures represent those orishas that they would mask with Catholic saints. And there were other things like the rice was to sort of tribute Brazilian women that would hide grains of rice in their hair and carry them with them as they were taken to a new land. And again, like when I was walking around San Francisco, I think the pressure of trying to figure out how to make this installation gave me a lot of freedom to sort of explore. And I went into a bookstore and found a hymnal book, and Amazing Grace is like the cornerstone of the Black church. My husband is American, and that song has been something that plays a huge role in his culture. So I took that and just experimented with submerging it into the sugar. All of this is play. All of this is like exploration. I have no idea how any of this is going to turn out until I actually make it. You can go to the next slide. So when I went to the museum to figure out how I was going to install everything, again, I had been thinking about, I swear on a stack of Bibles, and I was trying to stack everything, but didn't have enough Bibles. And as I was laying it out, my husband made the observation that it looked like evidence. And I thought that was a really interesting observation. So I kind of kept everything the way that I originally had laid it out. So the darker pieces of sugar is the sugar that I actually burned at the curator's apartment. And I just played with temperature and played with what I could do with sugar. I think now I'm a lot more versed in the ability of like how to manipulate the material, but it's taken me, I want to say like 10 years to get to that point, and I'm still constantly learning. And for the duration of this exhibition, I would let the sugar melt over time, and it would just sort of like turn into this big gloopy mess of sugar with like varying colors. And one of the other things that I didn't mention was thinking a lot about how religion has been used in the Black church to condemn homosexuality. So I have taken in this piece, I've twisted, like physically twisted some of the Bibles after I had cast them in the sugar. And then also thinking about the separation of church and state, which is why there's a gavel, and just sort of like bending that around. You can go to the next slide. This is a piece that I created based on my experience in Mauritius. I went there primarily to study the food as a way to talk about migration patterns into the island. And I was really enamored with this one part of Mauritius. It was a village called Lemoine, which is in the southern part of Mauritius. And there's a huge population that are the descendants of slaves. They're referred to as Creoles. And during slavery, there was a lot of Maroons that established a village on top of Mount Lemoine. And it was a very strategic positioning. It was very hard to scale. And when slavery was abolished, the British sent troops to tell them that they were free, and also to recapture some of those who escaped. And they all jumped off the side of the cliff of Lemoine because they were so afraid of being recaptured. So the trade of fishing was one way that they were able to sustain themselves. And after slavery was abolished, former slaves were supposed to do a 7-year apprenticeship for plantation owners so that they could recuperate costs that they like, just economy had been crashed. The sugar economy was crashed because they now had to pay for labor, and they refused to do it. And they focused primarily on fishing, and it became this generational trade that was passed down. And I think of that very much as a revolutionary act. So, you know, Creoles, they have the stereotype that Black Americans have as being lazy, savage, you know, all of those things. But fishing is very time-consuming, laborious trade. You know, it's not easy, it's deadly. And I thought that those two things just didn't really mesh well. So Mauritius was also a former sugar colony. So I decided to cast these bottles out of sugar. The bottles were used, my husband went fishing a lot when we were in Mauritius, and one of the methods that a lot of people used was using line fishing. So they would take a bottle and they would wrap the line around the bottle and then cast the line into the water and then hand pull the line. So I sort of wanted to replicate the history of fishing in that area, but also think presently about how that trade is starting to die out because there are foreign boats that are coming into their waters. So for the duration of these pieces being suspended, they would melt over time. And then just because like no artist is a genius, someone came into my studio and got hooked on one of the fishing tackles and brought the whole thing down. So the broken bottles, it was not intentional. And I was horrified. But then I looked at it and I was like, you know what, though, that kind of goes with the concept and the ideas that I'm thinking about. So that has now become a part of the work. You can go to the next slide. And again, this was the installation at the McCall Center. I was fortunate that the studio space had a thermostat in there, so I could sort of play with how the sugar melted. I could also play with the temperature in which I cooked it. I just like really tried everything that I could possibly do with the material. And really came to love the fact that it's ephemeral. So every time I show this piece, it's never quite the same. It's always different. I love that the material doesn't last forever. It makes for very good cleanup when you're deinstalling, but also it's, I like the idea of the work being experiential and not necessarily like a way to, you can't really commodify the work because it won't last forever. It's kind of like my middle finger to the art world in a lot of ways. I don't think that art needs to last forever. And I also like the fact that you can't necessarily contain it. So this is a piece that was like really transformative to me. And I think that all of the work that I've made since has been ephemeral as well. You can go to the next slide. If there is a next slide. Gotta know what I sent you guys. Is that it? Okay, if that's it, then we can go back. We can go back to Dr. Tao.
Wow, that is incredible. You're always blowing my mind in that I feel like we've known each other forever. When you're talking about the Orishas, when, you know, evidence, these are things that I'm writing about in my book. And to see that it wasn't a mistake, but the fact that somebody shattered those bottles, that makes that piece. So to know the story behind that and to hear you talk about it is really...
I try to really dispel the idea of artists as genius, because like, let's get real, we're not geniuses. Like some shit is just really like improvised. And, you know, I think failure is a huge part of my practice. I try to embrace failure, and I learned so much from failure, like the sugar burning at the curator's apartment. Like I felt horrible because there was like sugar all over her apartment, but the color and the texture of that sugar is not something that I would have planned for. And it just worked in my favor. So I just try to embrace that. Like you cannot predict everything that's going to happen with a material. And sugar is a very challenging material to work with. So it's a lot about giving up control and allowing the material to be what it's going to be and do what it wants to do. So you have to sort of surrender to that. And I think once I understood that, I think that the work got better. But it's still hard. It's like this internal struggle of wanting perfection. And it's like, damn it, why won't this sugar stay forever? And like, you just have to like learn to deal with it.
Oh man, when you said 10 years, I felt that because I tried just one time, like trying to cook with sugar to imitate, you know, thinking about sponge sugar. And it's so difficult that, you know, we're talking about burning, we're going to be burning plantains tonight. It's actually part of the process to burn it, but that you have to pay attention, you have to put care into it. You have to, you can't walk away from the stove.
No, it will just like catch on fire. Like I've done that. Like you know, what was revolutionary to me is when I was actually at MOAD installing that piece. I got a thermos, like I got candy a thermometer
Yeah.
that beeps when it gets to the temperature that you want.
Okay.
Like,
That's a
just
pro tip.
revolutionized everything, because I was burning sugar like crazy. You'd see the smoke coming out of my kitchen.
It
So
smells
like,
nice,
it was like a great accident to happen, because like this is like a game changer. I never burned anything after that.
because there's no going back.
Yeah.
Once you've gone past it with the caramelization, it's you're done, right? But yeah, so I have all of these different plantains, because as much as like you cannot control the burning, but you have to sort of surrender to it, the kitchen is so much about death and rot in a way that is really generative to me. So I have all of these different plantains that are different colors. It was pretty funny just thinking about that 1940s American commercial and this idea that you have to teach people how to eat bananas. You know, Americans still are not really eating plantains, but it would probably baffle them to know that it has to look like this,
yes,
to be ready to go. Otherwise,
like really dry and not
yeah,
sweet at all.
Exactly. So my mother's from Jamaica, and I often think about, you know, the Caribbean in a way that you described. What did you say? That you have to just surrender and let go of control.
That's very hard to do.
About Jamaica.
No, not at all. They're like very like,
yeah, like things will not happen as you need them to. You have to like embrace that this place is, yeah, there's something powerful at play. So I feel like there's a kind of ritual to cooking, and plantains are just eaten across the region, across South America. And it's owing to this West African heritage that a lot of us have. But it's also the fact that these are, you know, endemic to Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So like this kind of
from Malay Islands.
Yeah.
There's quite a few things that I think it's interesting that there's a lot of things that people think are native to the Caribbean that really aren't, that were brought from the Malay Islands, like breadfruit, for example, that was brought to, it was a very starchy filling material that filled up the bellies of slaves. So, you know, people think that breadfruit is natural to the Caribbean. And the same thing with plants, and it was taken to West Africa first to feed a lot of the enslaved that were in like holding pens before they were shipped to the islands. And like I'm really fascinated with the fact that you know, it's so much a part of the region, the culture, and like the food that we eat. It's so much a part of it that I love that we're able to take something and transform it.
Right, that you have mofongo, you have tostones, you have all of these different variations of plantains, but also to think about the transplant is important because African and Asian people are not native to the Caribbean. Like the Caribbean names the Carib Indians, right? So I'm kind of just sitting with all of these histories in the kitchen and how we were transplanted there centuries ago, and breadfruit is too, you know, and people eat it in Hawaii also, I learned. So it just makes a lot of sense when you kind of put it all together.
They had it in Mauritius too. I was yes, I was like excited, and I was like, I'm gonna roast this and fry it. And it was the first time my husband ever had it. And I was like, it's so good.
Oh, so yeah, I didn't even know that. And I've just been discovering through traveling, just like how you were on your Fulbright. So I'm just showing you here, this apron that I'm wearing was a gift from cousins of mine in Suriname when I visited there. And I actually presented this research on sugar when I was in Suriname for a conference. So that's the former Dutch Caribbean. And the food, everything felt just the same. People there look like me and you. But they speak Dutch, they speak their Creole language, they speak a patois that sounds very similar to Jamaican. So I'm just cutting the plantains here to get started. So it really should be this color. And you can do this vertical incision that I described. This is probably the hardest part to sort of get right in terms of cooking sweet plantains, or plantains as we know them, to make sure that you're able to get the skin off in a manner that is clean enough. So there can be a little bit of trial and error to make sure that you're doing this right. But honestly, this is a really easy recipe in that there are not too many steps. So
I cut the ends off and peel it off because I can't.
yeah,
It's biting it, but I just chop it off.
So in my recipe, I called for 2 of these. So I top and tail them, and then cut that incision, which makes it so much easier to peel them, to me at least. So yeah, on my apron, you can see the type of food that is eaten in Suriname, a lot of Dutch influence, but a lot of West African influence, in that the enslaved people there were coming from the same places, but also from Southeast Asia. So again, Afro-Asian foodways and the plantation coming together through European colonialism and violence. So I'm cutting the plantains on the bias, which is diagonally. I tend not to be too precise, but you should try to be very precise in how you cut the plantains so that they will cook evenly. But yeah, you're gonna have to pay careful attention as you're cooking them, because part of what you're doing is actually burning them, because they're not quite right if they don't have that kind of charred, burned, caramelized, crystallized sense of the sugar that we're going to add to the dish, but also in terms of the natural fructose sugar that is in the plantain.
So you add sugar to yours?
Yeah, just for this special recipe. And I'm telling you that I did that because I was making plantains and for someone, and they're like, oh, I'm going to eat them last as dessert. And I got so pissed off because I was like,
yeah, that's weird.
But I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I'm gonna make it into like the best dessert ever then. Like, why bananas foster? Why not plantains foster? And let's add some rum in there, especially thinking about your newer work and that exhibition, thinking through the materiality of rum, coffee, sugar. It's all of these different forms of sugar that I'm interested in kind of putting together, because rum is also really important to the Caribbean and Mauritius, right? Because of that sugar history.
We talked about that earlier. Mauritian rum is like it's probably the most tolerable rum I've ever had. It's very smooth. It's almost like water. Whereas like Ray and Nephews will burn a hole in your stomach.
That, yeah. Okay.
You know, like I've had instances where like it's really hard to get good plantain here on the West Coast because it's not something that people generally eat. The only place I've actually seen really good plantain was actually when I was in San Francisco. I wasn't installing for MOAD. I think I just like had a show and I wanted to go there just as a break. And we were staying in actually a Chinese neighborhood. And we were walking down the main road and there was this fruit stand that had like a pile of plantain and it was like 99 cents a pound. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can buy this whole stand and eat the whole thing. But like when I can't get good ones here, I try to, as soon as I take them out of the oil, I'll sprinkle some sugar on it. And then like, I know that there are other parts of the region that they put cinnamon on it. So I'll sprinkle a little cinnamon on top too. And that sweetens it without adding way too much sugar to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, because as much as sugar is great, we also want to cut back on it and not use oil or butter, but we're going to be effective today. So. You
talked about Maria Magdalena Campos Pons because like I was like fortunate enough to be in a show with her because like she's the artist I want to be when I grow up. And she talked a lot about how like she hates sugar so much and she tries to exclude it out of her diet. And I was like, wow, that's like some serious dedication, because I don't know if I can do that. But I really admired her passion of, you know, the disdain that she had for sugar, and like to be able to eliminate that was pretty amazing, because I will eat the hell out of some chocolate. Like cannot not eat sugar.
I wonder if it applies to rum for her as well, because Cuban rum is so good.
I have not had that yet. Have not had that yet.
Okay, so I think you can see the cooking process is taking place. I know in my recipe that was posted online, I said oil, but we're actually gonna work with butter just because I am gonna be adding rum. Again, don't do it if you're not sure that you know how to do that, because I don't want you to burn down your kitchen. But yeah, I'm just gonna let them saute for a bit, start to brown. Yeah, I don't know, Andrea, if you wanna start your process too, and we can do this together. I feel like mine is gonna take 10 minutes to sort of start to brown, and maybe we can talk back and forth.
Okay. When I'm making a sculpture with sugar, it really depends on the installation and like how big it needs to be. So I got a small mold that I made. I tend to work with silicone.
Ah.
It's much easier to work with. It's really flexible. It's easier to get the sugar out of it because it is so flexible. I've broken quite a few bottles in my time, but this is a really great material to work with. Like I said, I wasn't, I started off as a painter. So like learning how to make sculpture has been like an interesting challenge. My molds are hideous, but they work.
Well, that's what's important.
Yeah, they're like atrocious. My molds are atrocious, but they work. So when I'm making the bottles, the easiest thing for me to do is to work with a shipping tube. So that's how I get this like really uniform shape. All you have to do is cut it to the size that you want. I tend to use like this is a Coca-Cola bottle. I use wine bottles. I use anything that kind of symbolizes colonization in a lot of ways. So when you're cooking the sugar, you absolutely have to use pure cane sugar. Not all sugar is alike. Brown sugar has a ton of molasses in it. So no matter how much you try to cook it, it has too much liquid in it that it will never solidify into anything. I was really lucky when I was in Mauritius to go to a sugar factory to actually see the process of making the sugar. So it has to absolutely be pure cane sugar with no molasses. I haven't tried using plain white sugar, but you can use confectionery sugar as well.
Ah, I have some confectionery sugar here.
Yes. Then you just need distilled water. And also you need some kind of substrate to go with it. So like I use corn syrup. You don't have to use corn syrup. The color of the corn syrup really doesn't matter. You can use vodka also as well. That's a bit more expensive. So I go with the 99-cent corn syrup. So what you do is like, depending on what it is you're casting, you pour the sugar into a pot. This is my sugar pot. I always use this pot when I'm cooking sugar. I got it from IKEA, but it has measurements within it so that you can kind of keep track of whatever it is you're making. And I think I've used this so much that like I can see the markings of where the sugar and the water was. So I can sort of ballpark things now because I've been working with it for so long. So
10 years, like, wow.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm aging myself. So what you want to do is you want to measure out your sugar. This is a very small batch because the bottle isn't very big. It doesn't require a lot of sugar and I'm only making one of them. So I did this in quarters. So I think I used 500 grams of sugar. You also need a lovely food scale so that you can accurately weigh how much you need. This is essential because if you don't get the right amount, I mean, it's basically science, it's chemistry. So you absolutely need to have a food scale.
It is chemistry.
Yeah.
Like things can explode, things can.
Oh, I've burned some sugar. Like I've had my whole kitchen full of.
It's dangerous. But also, I mean, that speaks to the question of the plantation and these factories. That's so cool you got to see the factory, because this work was dangerous.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
people were doing in
even
indentured.
the factory that we went to was definitely not, it's
Mhm.
not safe. I mean, just being there were all kinds of like parts of the sugarcane that was like just blowing around randomly, and it was getting into our eyes. So yeah, it's definitely not a safe environment whatsoever. I think they just sort of humored me because I was an artist going there. You need a food thermometer. Absolutely, you have to have it. A candy thermometer, same thing. This digital one is amazing because it takes the burn out of anything you want to do. And you'll use it again, like if you're cooking a roast or something like that, barbecue, you'll absolutely need one of these.
So it
I
beeps
highly
when it's ready.
say that again.
Like it makes a sound, it beeps when it.
Yeah, it beeps. So like I don't like I've forgotten because it takes a minute. It takes like at least a week. So it's beeping now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a week. It takes at least an hour to cook the sugar, depending on how big of a batch you're cooking. So like, okay, it doesn't want to stop beeping. So when I'm cooking for an installation, I generally cook large batches because once you pour everything into the mold and the sugar cools, you can actually reuse it, which I didn't know for the longest time. I would just like cook another batch, which was like huge waste of time and material. but you can cook another batch. You can just like warm it up and then reuse it. But this saves so much time and you won't burn anything. You can set it to however long you want to cook it for, and it beeps and alarms and lets you know. So the first thing you want to do is you want to measure out however much sugar you plan on cooking. With this one, I only needed 500 grams of sugar, and I actually have a lot left over. I could probably cast 2 more bottles with this. And after pouring the 500 grams, you want to add 250 grams of water. This is filtered water.
Yeah, you said distilled water was important.
Yeah, I use distilled water, but filtered water is fine. I've used tap water when I've run out of distill. It's not the worst thing, just that sometimes the water has impurities in it. I mean, I'm not a chef. If I was a chef, I would probably want to just strictly use distilled water because, you know, if somebody's eating it, then you may want to be cognizant of what's in the tap water.
Right, because it's all about precision.
Yeah, so then you boil it at like a medium high, which is what I did here. And then you have to let it, you want to cook it slow because if you cook it too fast, it'll just burn and then it won't set the way you want it to. So you just cook it really low and slow. I would say like medium high. And then once you start to see it bubble, you can add the vodka or you use the corn syrup and you add, I believe it's, for this, I'm adding 150 grams of corn syrup.
Okay. Yeah,
And
the bubbling is interesting. Like it turns kind of white and then, yeah.
And then it just turns into this amber color. Everyone asks me like if I'm adding something to it, and I'm like, no, that's just naturally what the sugar's gonna do. The only sugar I've cooked that doesn't turn amber is pure refined sugar. And I generally don't like to work with it so much, but I've used it recently to make like a thick, simple syrup to create like if you were to have rock candy, it's like sort of crystallized. I've done some work where I've like submerged a cyanotype into that material and then let it sort of, you let the moisture evaporate and it starts to crystallize. And Yeah.
The crystals are so important. I guess I could say a little bit about what's going on in my pan. So I'm letting the plantains just kind of brown, and it should be pretty even on both sides, but you just have to sit with it, and adjust the heat accordingly so that it's caramelizing. So you can add more butter or oil. And for today, I got some Appleton rum, bacon rum, just to
No Ray nephews. You don't want to like burn a hole in somebody's gut. Like
yeah, that's my dog in the rum wars. So Team Jamaica here. This is signature single estate Jamaica rum. But I also found this cool like blend that's Trinidadian and Jamaican.
Ooh.
So I'm gonna use the dark rum.
I should blend. That blend, I should be Trini and Jamaican.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, can you find plantains in any Mexican food markets? My experience is yes.
Yeah, and that was the thing in the beginning of the pandemic. You told me that.
Yeah.
Where am I gonna find Scotch bonnets? Where am I gonna find plantains? And yeah, bodegas.
Yeah.
I got.
Bodegas are fantastic.
Yeah.
There's when I was like, my best friend lives in Bed-Stuy, and I think we were just walking through and we passed a bodega that had a sign that said Chung's Market, and I was like, yes. But they sell like they sell what's for the culture. Like they know their audience, which is great. So you can find plantain, you can find things that are specific to our culture, which I really appreciate that they make those things accessible, because they're really hard to find sometimes, especially out here. It's really hard to find certain things. So like every time I go to New York, I like go eat my food real quick and then try to bring them back if I haven't destroyed it all.
Okay, so I'm adding a little bit more butter to mine just to get it kind of evenly cooked. And it's gonna feel like, oh, it's burning, but that's the kind of charring that you want as the sugar is working together to create this kind of sauce, because it's gonna be just like bananas foster. So it will be a very caramel, rich sauce. It's supposed to be decadent. This dish is from New Orleans, another kind of port city of the Caribbean. So, I poured a little bit of the rum into this little cup. I do not recommend pouring the rum if you're going to cook with it from the bottle. You want to make sure you don't over pour it in, but slowly add it, because obviously if you add water and oil together, you're going to have a problem. So the butter helps, but just do it all in moderation and sort of take your time with it and the temperature, because you don't want it to be too hot. But yeah, how is the temperature?
Sometimes I'm like, it's just like,
yeah. That's the chemistry. I'll add a little bit more rum, but how is the temperature on yours looking?
It's fine. It generally takes like, I want to say 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the quantity of the sugar that you're cooking. I kind of pre-cooked some of the sugar prior to the cast, just because I knew it would take quite some time. So I think I cooked this one for about 45 minutes. So you can see the finished color inside, but it'll bubble and the temperature will slowly rise. And you want it to get to 320 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything past that, it'll start to turn a darker color. It'll start to burn. So this is called a hard crack. If you think about candy making, it's the same sort of concept of making candy. So if I were to add some kind of flavoring to this, like some kind of acidic flavoring to this, it would be like a lollipop.
Oh.
So that's essentially what you're making, is like a hard candy, like a Jolly Rancher or something like that. Oh. So it just all depends on how you've decided to add flavor to it or not add flavor to it, which is something that I've considered before in the past. Like I thought about adding some kind of flavoring to it that was somewhat repulsive, and having it as something that I like distributed as people were in the gallery space, so that they could like you know, think it was like this delicious candy, but be like severely repulsed by the taste of it, just to have that sort of
bittersweet, like you're gonna, yeah, I mean, it's so sensorial, and I
Yeah.
feel about your art. I hope I get to see some in person one day. But yeah, it's so exciting to hear you talk about process and to be so generous with that, because not all artists will talk about that and demystify it, or
And we're not geniuses. I had to like ask a cook, a chef, how I finally found a chef that was willing to sort of reveal how she makes her things. But like whenever I tend to watch like HGTV or the cooking channel, because I would watch a lot of those dessert shows to see how they were able to like create these amazing sugar sculptures. Like it is pretty mind-blowing when you see it. And you know, they're using blow torches, and I haven't like gotten to that point yet. But I'm at the point where I want to try to blow sugar, because you can treat it like glass.
right.
You know, you can blow it the way you would blow glass. It has a lot of qualities of glass. So like if you were to break a shard off, it could actually cut your skin, and you know, you'd start bleeding. So like I think that there's a lot of room to play with the material, and I'm more engaged with materials that give me a lifetime of exploration, as opposed to something that like I can figure out in, you know, the span of a year. So it's a challenging material, but I'd like to see how far I can push it.
It's so malleable. It's really exciting to think about the experimentation. So I just added some ground allspice, which is part of the recipe at the very end, to really give it some more Jamaican flavor, as opposed to like the New Orleans bananas Foster. But yeah, you could also add cinnamon, which you were talking about earlier, for some more sweetness. So I'm almost done. So I'm just gonna go and get some ice cream so that we can make this into an actual dessert. Since I was so insulted when somebody said that it was dessert. So it's like, okay, here is dessert. But when I cook plantains the proper way, when I'm not breaking all the rules, like I am here, I want it to be eaten with the meal, not after. You know? So
With rice and peas and whatever it is protein that you're eating.
Yeah.
So once this is reached 320, you turn off your stove, and then it's ready to pour into the mold. So I poured it into my mold. You want to do it slowly so that you don't burn yourself, because the sugar will bubble up, and you really don't want hot molten sugar on your hand. As someone who has burned themselves, that's not fun. It hurts. It's like a first-degree burn. So I will, and then you want to let it cool. I let it cool for about an hour, depending on where I am. I've installed the sugar bottles. I've installed it in Oslo, and that just like cooled super fast. So it was really easy to cast this, but also very hard for it to melt on its own. I had to like cheat and take like a heat gun. I was there in like February. It was not hot enough.
So yeah, the temperature of the room matters, right? And you've done this all over the world. It's amazing.
Yeah, I like the fact that the environment always alters the way that the work will turn out.
Right.
So I usually bind my molds with, again, I use mailing tubes to make this. So what you can do is you can cut a piece of the cardboard of the mailing tube and place it around it so it securely holds your mold in place. And also so that, you know, you can hold the piece together and that you don't have any separation in your cast. And it's also easier to take your cast object out. So, you know, you can take it out, and you have to be very gentle with it because you can break the bottle, like I have done many times.
Oh, now I need to start all over. Wow.
And then you have a
There
bottle.
it is. That is amazing.
So yeah.
Focus
And then
on.
whenever I'm hanging it, I mean, there's like, again, there's so much room to play. When I'm hanging it, I tend to just stick the fishing line within it so that it makes the process of hanging it a little bit easier. And then I can also play with how it hangs. If I want it to hang straight up versus, you know, to the side or diagonally, I'll insert the line into the mold and you know, it sets. And then I generally will like add the line to it, and then, you know, you can do whatever you want. I've made like boats out of the same recipe.
Right.
And it lasts pretty well. I do not encourage people to, if you want to preserve it, do not put it in the fridge. Because
Oh.
cooling of the fridge, once you take it out, it will speed up the melting of the sugar. So
Wow.
it will melt at a really rapid pace. It's best to keep it in a room temperature space. If it's, you know, if I've had a situation where I was installing the sugar boats here in San Diego and we had like a heat wave. It was like 102 degrees outside. And you know, it's only gonna last a day. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can just like hope for the best, but expect the worst. But outside of being in a heat wave, it lasts pretty long. When I was installing at CAM in LA, it was extremely hot and they didn't have, they actually had no control of their temperature in the space. Another institution, I guess the way that they had their AC working, it was connected to two different institutions and they had no control of the space. So they had to actually close the doors to try to confine the AC unit into the space, but it melted pretty fast. And then I would come in and replace, and they were like, can you add more to it? And I was like, no, it's supposed to melt. I was like, that's the process of the work. It's supposed to melt. It's not meant to last forever. And I think that horrifies some curators or some institutions, but I'm like, I don't know why you asked me to make this piece because it's not supposed to last. It's gonna melt. You know, it's not meant forever. And I don't think all art needs to last forever. You know,
That's a powerful statement. And I mean, I see, shout out to my friend Isis who's here. So she's in Jamaica and said, would the sugar bottles keep in Jamaica? So it depends on the weather, I'm guessing, right?
yeah, I mean, it's all about your environment, which I love because that's an added thing to the work. You know, like it's not something that I can predict. I have no idea what's going to happen when I install this work in another space. And I like the uncertainty. You know, for me, it doesn't, this is everybody, the first thing that everybody asks me is how to commodify my work. And I find that really annoying.
Yeah.
As opposed to asking me more about the concept of the work.
Right.
So I like that they can't commodify it.
Yeah, it can't be replicated.
It's more about the experience. And I think that culture is constantly evolving. So why shouldn't the object constantly evolve?
Yeah, I agree. Well, my dish is ready. So hopefully you all were able to see, I put two little brioche toasts with it, but here's this dessert, plantains prop Goff, holding it up to the camera so you can see. So it is really delicious because it has just a little bit of that rum taste of the sugar distilled there. I added allspice, you know, just for that Jamaican flair. Just at the very
somebody asked you what's the best kind of rum to drink or to cook with.
So somebody is asking me to enlist in the rum war. Well, actually, as part of Afro-Asia Group, which you're on the advisory board of, and Brian Terry is, I actually want to start a rum club, and that's rum because Martinique can say they have the best rum. Jamaicans obviously think they have the best everything. But it's a debate that I'm willing to have and to try these different rums. But yeah, I'm gonna try a little bit So I've got salted caramel ice cream and pretzels.
That's my favorite.
I'm gonna have a little taste of this before we go. Oh my gosh, it's so good. And I also in the recipe said to put a little bit of finishing salt on it, just so that you have the kind of flavor of the sweetness of the plantains with a tiny little bit of salt to kind of bring out the flavor. So if you all try it, let us know. If you try to make a sugar bottle of your own, let us know. But this has been so much fun, Andrea. I'm so glad that we were able to cook together and experiment with sugar.
I always like hanging out with you.
Maybe people can ping you on your Instagram if they make your dessert or bottle. So please do that. Look them up. Thank you so much. We are just, I kept getting messages from people saying how astonishingly phenomenal this program is. So you are both so knowledgeable and shared so much with us. I feel really full of love and excitement. And Elizabeth, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you both so much. And I loved hearing you, Andrea, talk about your installation at MOAD. It was one of my favorites that we've had there, of course.
One of my favorite institutions for like, you guys are small, but you're super mighty. Like, you guys are like so on point, and I really loved working with everybody there. Like, it was a joy to do that project. And I had so much fun doing that project there, and particularly there. It was great to do that.
Well, we'll definitely have to have you back for more site-specific installations.
And we'll all be there.
Yeah, please bring me to the West Coast. I over here.
All right.
Stay at my house now.
Yeah. I think definitely warrants an in-person program at MOAD when we can all gather there again. So thank you both so much for this program. It was fabulous, and I'm only just a little bit angry that I can't taste the food, but I'll make it myself. And I do want to just remind everyone that in just a week, we can have more of Professor Goffe with Bryant Terry on the Chopping It Up at MOAD program. That's on Friday, May 28th at 3 p.m. on MOAD's Instagram Live. So just go to MOAD's Instagram page and you will see it at 3 p.m. next Friday. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Good night.